Welcome to the Untoxic Boss podcast, where leadership meets empathy and productivity meets compassion. I am your host, Janine K. Brown. We will dive into the world of effective leadership without toxicity. Get comfortable and learn to stop being a jerk at work. In today's topic, we're talking about creating safe spaces, allyship strategies for racially divided workplaces. What a topic, and how timely is this topic? We've been trying to get our guests on the show for a few weeks, and I tell you, everything works out the way it's supposed to. Because I think right now things are heating up, especially here in the U.S., related to our presidential election. And a lot of things have been said. There has been some nasty word throwing, things related to DEI, minimizing women in the workplace by saying they are a DEI hire, minimizing women of color, particularly Black women, that we are not qualified to do the jobs that we have, even with our credentials and over 20 years of experience, again, being categorized as DEI hires. And so today's topic is right on time. And today's topic is important to me because I'm going to be honest with you all. Allyship, when I hear the words, I give them the side eye, I twist up my lips. Sometimes I completely tune out. And you're probably saying, Janine, you're a DEI professional. How do you tune out with allyship? Shouldn't you be working with your clients to ensure that they are better allies in the workplace? And I'm going to say, yeah, I should be. I should be. And honestly, I do. I do my best. And not to be a hypocrite, but one of the concerns I have about allyship is, can we be allies to one another if we don't have the same interest? So if we don't gain the same and we don't lose the same. So can someone be an ally to me if what I have to lose is not the same as what they have to lose? And they have an opportunity to opt out on the loss, the pain, the injury that comes to me. When we think about allies in the form of, war, if we go to war and Great Britain goes to war with us, it's because we're fighting for democracy and we're coming, in some sense, right? So we are coming to war and our loss and our gains are equal and equitable, right? So what we lose is similar. So I always feel like, are people going to jump off the allyship? And that's the thing that concerns me. Oftentimes I've seen allies because of the great risk, personal risk to themselves, isolation, jobs, promotions, relationship capital. They jump off the ship. So I'm like, can we really have allyship? So in the comments, we want y'all to be a part of today's conversation. Share with us your thoughts about allyship. We're going to bring our guest up because I have some questions for her. I want to maximize our 30 minutes together so that we can have a great conversation, because I have some inherent bias about this topic. But our guest is an expert. She has been doing this work for many years, both as an internal employee in public accounting at a firm that she worked in. Probably before she even started doing the work, she was trying to build allyship or being impacted by allyship. And now as a consultant, she's helping companies all around the world, not just in the U.S., not just in the Southeast. She has a global practice that is working with companies on all sorts of things related to diversity, equity, and inclusion and development. So I want you all to welcome my special guest, someone who is dear to me, to the show. You're probably saying, Janine, you say this every time you have a guest on. That's because people are dear to me. So, Miss Latesha Byrd, CPA, CEO, and I'm sure there's some more letters in there, but I want to call you brilliant and beautiful. Come to our show. Tell our guests all about who you are and what you do.
Hi, Janine. Thank you for having me. I'm just honored to share this space with you, and thank you for the kind words too. Y'all, I've known Janine for a long time, and Janine, even though she has, a bout with allyship, which we'll get into, Janine has been an ally, a mentor, an advocate for me for many, many years. I know I wouldn't be where I am without you, Janine. So I just want to say that before we dive into the conversation. But hey Hey everybody. Again, my name is Latesha Byrd. I am the CEO of Perfecta, and what I'm really passionate about is turning workplaces into safe spaces where everyone truly belongs. I founded and started my company Perfecta a decade ago, which I can't even believe, after recognizing a gap in the workplace. So I really started my company focused on career leadership development for Black, Hispanic people, women of color. And then I just realized that out of every single person that I was coaching, they were all really going through the same exact thing, no matter the company size, the industry, years of experience they had, where so many of us from underrepresented communities are underpaid, we are undersupported, we're overlooked, and we're overworked. And so through my years of coaching, I recognize that coaching will only do so much if the institutions and the workplaces that we're required to kind of operate in really don't change. And so I've had the opportunity to facilitate trainings and workshops and keynotes on DEI, allyship, inclusive leadership. But I'm really passionate about this because I recognize that through supporting organizations holistically, I can really impact the culture from the inside out. And so that really is why I'm passionate about this. I believe in this work. This work has definitely been under attack, but I know that we have so much more work ahead to do.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we're actually in a really good time when it comes to creating and building inclusive workplaces because we're in the midst of a huge generation shift and a generation that's coming in with a different perspective. And so I have hope in our younger generation. I think we're about to see the biggest movement of young people under the age of 25 that we have seen since the civil rights movement. So y'all heard it here first. I have just made a huge prediction. When Time Magazine and Fortune Magazine is talking about it, you be like, and on July 26th, Janine said it first.
I agree with you. I mean, the young people are the future, and the workplace is more diverse than it's ever been. And as we bring in new generations, there's a different needs that generations have. And I'm also finding that, the younger generations are more bold, they're more courageous, they're speaking up, they're making demands, and I love to see it.
I love to see it too. One, it makes my work so much more exciting when I can sit in a room and I listen to a baby boomer say, the grass isn't greener. And then I hear a 20-some-year-old Generation Z say, oh, yes, it is. It is greener. We can leave and go somewhere else and find a company culture that aligns with our values. And so I tell people, Generation X and baby boomers, you better watch out. If you are unwilling to look at your culture and be honest and make significant change that aligns with the values, not only your company core values, but the values of your employees, you are going to be in a tough situation in the marketplace, which leads us to, I think, what today's topic is about. And I have a big question for you, Latesha. When we think about allyship and we're talking about these different generations in the workplace, and you even indicated that the workplace is more diverse than it has ever been. My question is to you: can men be allies to women? Can Black women be allies to Asians? Can white women be allies to Black women? Can Christians be allies to Muslims? And can Jews be allies to Baptists? Like, when we think about all the different things that's happening in the workplace, if I am enabled to run up and down the hall, can I be an ally to someone who is confined to a wheelchair? Is it true? Can we actually be allies to one another across our differences? And how do we do it?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the way that we at Perfecta really talk about and define allyship is anyone can be an ally, right? No matter, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, whatever. But if you have a privilege that someone does not have, you can extend your privilege, you can extend your power to provide access to build a path of equity for that individual who does not have that. It doesn't matter what role you're in, right? And so when I come in and facilitate allyship trainings, not only am I talking to the executives in the C-suite, I'm talking to the person who might be 1 year in their organization. I'm talking to that mid-level manager. I'm talking to someone who maybe doesn't even have a team, but they are supporting customers that are from an underrepresented community. In order for someone to really recognize who can I be an ally to, it's so important to have a level of self-awareness and to really spend time reflecting on what are my personal identities, what are the identity groups that I belong to. Based on those identities that I have, which of those identity groups are a part of a social dominant group, right? And so, if I were to break this down from, race and gender and all of that, right? We know that the social dominant group for race is white. The social dominant group for gender is male, right? The social dominant group for, the sexual orientation is someone who is straight. Based on that, you have the ability to be an ally to someone else, right? Knowing that I am able-bodied, I can be an ally to someone who has a disability. Knowing that English is my first language, I can be an ally to someone whose first language may not be English, and so on and so forth. So, there's a lot of different ways we can really slice and dice who we can be allies to, but it's so important to have that awareness to recognize, where do I hold the power, where do I hold the privilege, and then how can I spread it and share it with someone who does not.
I like that, Latesha. You said pretty much that allyship is the practice of using your privilege to support and advocate for underrepresented groups or maybe even marginalized groups. So the numbers aren't there, and then you're being treated as if you don't add value or have a sense of belonging in the workplace. I really like that. So I'm on the train. I'm riding the train with you, this allyship train. But when we think about the culture, and I don't want to talk about the political culture in the world, in the
Right.
US, but when we think about workplace culture, how can one be an ally actively? Can give us some real examples of some additional examples of how a company can institute like active allyship.
Yeah, it's not about being a bystander, it's about being an upstander. There's a lot of different roles that allyship can take on, right? And again, I really want everyone to feel empowered to be an ally. I'm going to talk about a few different roles. The first one I want to talk about is the sponsor. You all may have seen some of these roles of allyship circulating the internet. The sponsor is typically someone who is sitting in a seat of power, leadership, authority, influence, where they are able to help others build credibility, notice who is in the room versus who's not in the room, and say, hey, I think we should include such and such in this meeting or in this conversation. It could be something as simple as when a new person joins a team, right? You are fully backing that person and saying, this is why Janine was hired, because Janine is an expert on XYZ, right? Or if you are noticing that the same person is getting all of the stretch opportunities at work, they're the ones that's getting promoted, pay attention to the other folks that are not getting those same opportunities to grow. Pay attention to the folks who are not getting promoted, right? And ask questions, right? Look for those patterns, look for those trends to say, have we thought about making sure that Diane has the same opportunities as John, right? Another role is the advocate. This is someone who is speaking up and ensuring that everyone's voice is heard, valued, and included. And again, I can talk about this from the policy, policy perspective, but also just, again, in a meeting. And sometimes when we think about allyship, we think of it it has to happen up here, but it can really happen in the day to day. If you notice that someone is quiet in a meeting, if you know that someone has a good idea that they're sitting on, right? Ask them to share. I noticed that you haven't shared anything, but I really value your perspective here, right? Or if someone, and again, as women, we are oftentimes overlooked or dismissed in meetings, right? We might say something, everyone just ignores it, and then you have a man that says the same thing, and they're like, that's it. You can always say, hey, actually, I think that, Diane had that point. Or when Diane does speak up, saying, I totally agree, right? Another role is the confidant. This is someone who's going to be a safe space. This is someone that you are able to provide a listening ear. You're able to be that person who notices when someone is being mistreated and you are checking on them, right? You are asking them, how can I support you? And then the last one I want to mention is the upstander. Again, this is someone who is going to be willing to speak up and out if they notice that there are some exclusionary practices, that's happening. Janine, earlier you mentioned the risk. This is someone who is willing to kind of risk their career, risk themselves to say, hey, that was not okay what you did here. This is not okay what you said here. And I want to call it out. And, I want to work towards some type of solution because that was really offensive or that was just not okay. So those are some of the, kind of day-to-day roles. But then, of course, at the policy level, there's a whole slew of things I would recommend for that.
You know what, Latesha, what you have just done is given us a list. And what I love about that list is all of them have some sort of action level, right? So it might not be if you are you speaking up and you are the one that's like, I'm going to call attention to things. You might not be at the sponsor level yet, but there's something that we all can do and take a role in being active as an ally. So I'm still, you know what? I done moved up from coach on the allyship conversation, but still got some doubts. So if you're someone that's still doubting that this can actually be actualized in your work, one of the things that that I'm really passionate about is psychological safety. And the Untoxic Boss has come out of the work that we do at Everyday Lead around helping companies create psychologically safe workplaces that translate into high performing teams that are more innovative, creative, and even just more social, right? So we get an opportunity to experience a sense of belonging, acceptance, accomplishment, and purpose, that might say, you know what, I love it here. I love my job. I love my boss, right? Do you hear that? Like, are we hearing that anymore in the workplace? And does allyship help us get this sense of strong belonging? And I'm going to use the word, I love it here, kind of feels in the workplace.
I think allyship, when everyone is actively practicing allyship, it is creating a sense of camaraderie, amongst the team. But when it comes to that, really building or curating that level of psychological safety, it is allowing there to be space for every person to, I'm not going to say bring their full selves, because I'm sure we can have a different whole episode about that.
Show. Yeah.
Right. But they feel comfortable in showing up in their skin. They feel comfortable talking about their experiences as it relates to their identities. They're not, masking, right? Like, masking is a term that means that you are afraid to say, hey, I am a part of the LGBTQ community, or my daughter, my son is transgender, right? You are afraid to kind of show some of these things, these identities that might be a part of a historically excluded group for fear of exclusion, right? And so I think with allyship, when you are really making an effort to make someone feel safe, heard, valued, not just for the work that they do, but who they are, you're valuing their perspective, you're valuing their experience, you are valuing who they are. Truly, you're asking questions, you're being curious. That will then kind of open up the opportunity for someone to start to share things about themselves that they may not would have shared on day one. And so, I have seen where allyship most definitely contributes to building that level of emotional safety, but it takes time, and, when we think about even that feeling of belonging, like, that is such a good feeling to show up on a team or to work for a company and say, like, I feel like I can breathe some.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I can be myself. And it doesn't have to, mean like I am going to tell all my business on day one, but do I feel comfortable questioning authority or leadership if I disagree? Do I feel comfortable recommending a new process or a new way of our team doing something if I see that we can do it more effectively instead of we're just doing it that way because we've always done it that way? There is a framework that I've studied from a psychologist. I think his name is Tim Clark. Don't quote me on that, but he talks about the 4 levels of psychological safety. Mm-hmm. And that final or that most optimal level is I think the challenger safety.
Safety. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel comfortable disagreeing in a meeting. Hey, I kind of see things a different way. Have we tried this? And that's really how you get to true innovation on the team. That's how a company is really going to grow if they do have that, optimal level of safety. And I do think allyship can, create an opportunity to build towards that level.
I totally agree with that. And so what we know is that when we are experiencing allyship in the workplace, it should be promoting inclusivity, right? So
Yes.
everyone has a sense in this culture that they belong. Your voice is important. Your ideas are important. Even the things that you don't like, we want to hear it, and that's important. It should enhance employee engagement because I feel like if everyone has a sense of feeling included and not excluded, but included at all levels of humanity, then you're going to get the best of them. They're going to be engaged. So when
Yes.
you talk about going to a happy hour after work or doing a volunteer event on the weekends, it's no question like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be there because I know we're gonna have a good time, and I can be my full self. If I want to dance, I can get on the dance floor and dance. At the
Right.
karaoke event, I can sing off key and it's not going to show back, it's not going to come up in my performance evaluation, right?
Right.
We foster a positive work environment and it doesn't mean that we don't correct people. It doesn't mean that we
Yes.
don't do feedback, right? So, what are some of the misconceptions about this work and this word allyship when it comes to performance in the workplace?
That's a good question. So you didn't send me that question in advance. Now I got to
I
think
did
on the
not. We're
spot.
gonna talk about it though. We're gonna talk about it because I think this is what I
Yes.
hear. This is what I hear when I talk about psychological safety, and I say,
Mhm.
the general definition is that people can speak up and share a dissent, different points of view, challenge. They can make mistakes and
Mhm.
errors without feeling a sense of personal threat, isolation, or even termination of their job. The first thing I
Yeah.
hear from our baby boomers and our Gen X, because they're the ones typically in leadership at this point in a lot of organizations. They was like, so what? We can't get feedback. We can't
Right.
tell people that they did something wrong. We can't. They feel like something's being taken away, right? Their
Mhm.
ability to have good work, perfect work, error free work papers. So I think that's one of the misconceptions. So when we think about allyship and we're talking about fostering a positive work environment, like what sort of things have you heard from your clients that concerns them when we talk about allyship when it pertains to performance and performance reviews and feedback?
Well, I think the first biggest myth is just because someone says they're an ally does not automatically make them an ally. And remember in 2020, where we saw a lot of what we call performative allyship, right? Allyship is a verb, allyship is an
Mhm.
action. Everyone said, I stand with the Black community, right? And then all these companies were getting called down. They're like, yeah, but why are your Black employees underpaid? The workplace is toxic, it's not psychologically safe. Like the words and the actions don't align. So that's one of the biggest myths is just because you say you're an ally doesn't mean that you are. We saw people posting those black boxes on Instagram, right? But what does that truly mean? And
Yeah.
so allyship means that you are doing the work. You are self-educating. And I really want to just double down on that. You're taking the opportunity to learn about different groups that you don't belong to. There's a lot of resources out there in the world. There's documentaries, there's books, there's podcasts, right? We have so much information at our disposal. No, you may not have proximity to a certain, identity group, maybe only at work, but that doesn't mean that you can rely on that one person to be that voice, to be that speaker for that entire community. So one is allyship takes work, it's an action. It's not just you're doing the work, and you're saying you're not just saying it, but you're doing it. I think the other one, another big myth is that privilege, right? Like acknowledging privilege does not mean that you didn't work hard to get to where you are. It doesn't mean that you don't deserve to be where you are, but it does recognize that there are certain advantages that you have that you were born into that individuals from other groups just simply don't have. And I think that's one of the biggest ones that I've also heard from our clients is, well, if I have to recognize my privilege as an ally, does that mean that I don't deserve to be in a leadership role? We're not saying that at all. But we are saying that there are other people who may have had it harder to get to that spot that you're in. and how can you then use your own position just to make it easier, for someone else, or to acknowledge that there are those barriers, to acknowledge that there are, maybe gaps. I think the last one that I want to mention is a myth around just allyship as it relates to company culture is there's such a huge disconnect between what leaders believe the culture is and what
Mhm.
employees, you know, are saying it is. And culture and that sense of belonging and safety, right? We don't get to dictate what someone's level of belonging or safety is. I can't go to you, Janine, and say, Janine, you should feel 100% sense of belonging here right now. Like that is, hopefully that is a result of, the equity and inclusion efforts of the organization, but we don't get to dictate that. And so too many times we often hear leaders say, this is just not who we are, right? Culture is something that is experienced. Culture is something that is felt. And, again, this really goes back to just, minimizing that gap between who we say we are and what we're truly doing and what we are allowing for. And so it does take intentionality. It takes making mistakes, and being okay with that, right? I have another one too. Now that I'm getting warmed up, we're talking about it. Something that I've heard from a lot of leaders at our clients is this: well, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to seem like I don't know it all or have it all together. And people really are drawn to vulnerability, and authenticity. And so no one is expecting you to be able to know everything about certain communities that you may not belong to. But we do want to hear you say, I am willing to learn. I'm listening. I'm reading. I am going to step out on a limb here and say that I'm a bit nervous. I don't want to mess up. But, right? But I'm recognizing that I have some work to do in this area. And I think that goes a very, very long way.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, and that was great. See, you don't have to get prepared when you stay prepared.
Right.
And because this work is real, right? So this, and I think this is really important. And I want to pause just for a moment to say that if you are seeking significant cultural change in your organization, this cannot just be done by volunteers on your DEI committee. Right?
Yes.
Volunteers on the DEI, they have passion. They want to drive change. They are sincere about what they want to achieve. But this is why you need skilled, studied, experienced consultants to do this work, right? You need to bring people in like Latesha to make sure. Why I keep calling you Latesha? Like Latesha to make sure that that you have a framework that is sustainable. And
Yeah.
this is why we bring experts onto this show, and experts like you onto this show, and experts who have been on both sides
Mm-hmm.
of the issue, right? You've experienced these sorts of racial divides in the workplace. You've experienced not having an ally, and you've experienced having allies in the
Mm-hmm.
workplace. And so you can talk from your lived experience, but you also study this work.
Yeah.
You study and you read these work papers. So I just wanted to take a pause in the middle of our conversation to impress upon those of you who are listening, when you think about taking on this kind of work in the workplace, you definitely want to have a strong consultant that's supporting that work. So we want to make sure that you are, that we bring these great people to you in addition to the work that we do at Everyday Lead. Because when we think about these common signs of racial division in the workplace, it gets really tense. And I'm going to give you a list of some of them. And they are, just simply lack of representation, especially in the leadership ranks. And so we come into organizations, you're like, you mean to tell me you've been around 100 years and you've never had a Black or Asian or Hispanic person on your board of directors, in your C-suite, in these roles? There's this separated social circles. And I learned, Latesha, about how golf is a social separator. I didn't think about that. I was at a client and talking to a manager in their ranks. He was Korean, and he was saying, golf is expensive.
Yeah.
And they all, right? He was talking about the white men in his firm. they all go play golf. And he was like, it's expensive. And economically, it just doesn't, it's not good. It's not a good time for me to play golf. Buying the clubs, paying the green fees, becoming a member. He was like, I'm a manager, I'm young, we're starting a family. So then you have these social circle separations. You
Well,
have
it
this
also takes a long time. Golf is not something where you go in for 30 minutes and you're gone. They be
it's a
out there
day.
10 hours. Who has that? Time is a luxury. Time is a privilege in itself too.
You are exactly right. And then we have disparities and opportunities. Special people get special projects, microaggressions, high turnover rates in some of these groups. So the narrative is we find Black candidates, we go into where they are getting educated. It could be historically Black colleges and universities, it could
Yeah.
be membership organizations at predominantly white institutions. So we're finding them, but they won't stay. So it turns into they can't hack it, which is an excuse, in my opinion, for not addressing the issue of the culture, why this particular group, women, people of color, are leaving your organization, not being part of the decision making process, and then pay disparities. So we see this happening in the workplace. What is the role of leadership in addressing these issues and fostering an environment of allyship?
I don't even know where to start. But you kind of touched on a lot of the challenges, which is we have to look inwards. We have to pay attention to what are we doing if we can't retain specific talent. Is it a them thing, or is it a we? Is it a us thing, right? And so, what we always recommend when a company comes to us and they say, "Hey, we can't retain, our Black women or women of color, or our we don't have enough trust between leadership and employees." The first thing that we do is really look at an organization's current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we do that by looking at the data, paying attention to the data, looking at the processes, looking at the disparities across recruiting, across promotion, across pay, across retention. It would be great if all organizations kept track of that. And sometimes they just don't have that data. We do work with smaller organizations as well, or nonprofits, where they may have a team of just one really trying to do this work. And so if they don't have the data, we'll talk to employees directly. So focus groups, sending out a survey as well, just to start to get a sense of employee sentiment. So if leaders don't know where to start, that's where you want to start, is talk to your people, kind of understand what they are experiencing, right? Before you just kind of jump in, throwing a bunch of solutions out there that may not be sustainable or may not be what the organization, truly needs. Also trainings, but not just one-off trainings, not just an annual, unconscious bias training. I remember about 5 years ago, I made the decision that I will no longer be coming in and doing a one-off training for an organization. If a company reached out and said, "Hey, we want to do an unconscious bias training," I would say, "Great. Well, what else are you doing to mitigate bias across the organization?" "Oh, well, we just want to do this one training and, we'll figure it out from there." No, you got to do more. And so, not just having one training, but having, a comprehensive training program across levels, across functions, really looking at the interventions that need to happen. Maybe it's your managers that are really having a hard time, connecting with their employees, building that trust within their teams. That might be an area to really start and dial down in. And so, quality is really important. I will also say, investing in employee resource groups. We work with a lot of employee resource groups, and they really can create that sense of belonging, that sense of community for many employees who don't come in having that day one. And so this is not the time. I know some companies are doing budget cuts and cutting back on their DEI investments, but this is definitely not the time to do that. Continue to invest, and not just invest in throwing money at the ERG for programming, but also training, developing those ERG leaders, making sure that your HR, DEI teams, or even those committees, have the time, that they are encouraged, that their managers are advocating for their involvement as well, so that you can, ensure the longevity of some of these groups and these committees that are in place, and actually give them power, give them a seat at the table, give them a voice, because they will be able to, really kind of create that feedback loop where they're sharing employee experience, employee sentiments up the ladder, and they can then communicate whatever that vision is, that commitment is, or that direction is from leadership, down to the rest of the organization. So, I can go on about different programming and ways to do it, but those are just some of the top ones that come to mind.
I think those are great. So the only thing I have left really is, how do you measure the impact of allyship and these initiatives in the organization? So what should companies be doing to measure them after they go through the implementation process?
Mm-hmm. So, how can companies measure the impact of allyship? One is to really define and also set metrics around how they want to measure allyship, because allyship can feel like such an intangible thing. But I would really take a step back to say, well, what is the result we are trying to get to through way of, implementing allyship practices across the organization? So what that could look like is putting some type of inclusion, equity, DEI competencies in those performance reviews, right? To really hold everyone accountable, especially those, people managers as well. So putting some competencies in there to really measure it on an individual level, continuing to host focus groups, continuing to conduct those employee engagement surveys, making sure though that, it's not just employee engagement, but you also are asking, what is your sense of belonging? What is your sense of emotional safety? Really looking into the data as well, because say if your organization is 80% white and majority of the organization says, hey, my level of belonging is great, you want to really dial into or dig deep into the data. So looking at intersectionality of identity groups, right? So what are our women saying at the organization? What are our employees from LGBTQ, community saying about their employee experience here? Paying special attention to that, having these ongoing conversations as well, and always just raising the bar, raising the bar on how those DEI committees are being invested in, making sure that there are conversations happening at the board level when they're also creating that strategy for how to move an organization forward, or, looking at, the values of the organization. Are you integrating DEI, into that? But yeah, I mean, it really just takes a comprehensive lens. And so again, performance reviews, looking into the employee engagement, or even doing a culture, engagement survey, paying attention to the groups that are being promoted, that are being recruited and hired, at specific rates, and setting goals, quantitative goals as well, to get there.
Yeah, your goals should be qualitative and quantitative. And I'm going to add one thing to Letitia's list, because she's nice and she's so kind and she's Southern and I'm not. And I'm going to say, stop gaslighting people. Stop gaslighting your employees about the experiences they're having in the workplace. Everything that you listed on there, Letitia, can clearly give you the data that you need and the insight you need about the work. And I will also say, if you want the truth about the culture of your organization and what people are experiencing, have a conversation with a Black woman. She's going to tell you. She is going to tell you. And the reason she is because she's the confidant to so many in the workplace, and at great personal risk. She has often put herself out there to speak up for others when others do not speak up for her. Mm-hmm. And how do I know that? It's because I've been in those situations.
Right.
I've seen it. And although I've been the protagonist in today's story around allyship, and there are moments where I'll honestly say I am somewhat skeptical, because I've seen people jump off the ship I have been a great benefactor of allyship.
Mhm.
My entire career in public accounting and practicing state and local tax, both in the government side and in public accounting, and even as a tax director in industry for a short period, I had amazing allies. So I do know that white men can be allies to Black women. I do know that even as a Black woman, I have been allies to others who don't look like me, don't practice the same religion as I do, don't identify sexually as I do, right? As cisgender or, I've been on both ends of all of the benefits of allyship, and it has made me a better human that has been able to help others achieve in their careers. And just because we look alike does not mean that we are alike, right? So even with other Black women who have different points of views, because we're not a monolith, I've been able to support women based on who they are as an ally and a mentor, and give them support, love, and cheerleading. And Latesha, and give them feedback that might not feel good, but
Yes.
guess what? They have turned it around, right? If I tell you, hey, you got to build up these skills in order for you to be excellent, you've done it. You and I've had that conversation, and you are amazing now at what you do because you stopped and you did the work. You found out what your sweet spot was. You've been able to create a firm when people told you were too young to do it. And
Yes.
that's what allyship does, right? We talked about experience. I was like, you need more experience in this. You
Right.
got to make sure that you understand this. And I'm sure you did not like me when I was giving it to you, but look at you now, right? And that's what allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship does
Mm-hmm.
for people. And when I share my story about allyship, I want to say this, and you might have a story to share with our audience too. Is I remember being in a situation where I was killing it at work, superstar. Moved to another team. First year was great. In the end of my first year, my partner, who I worked with closely, left the firm, and I felt completely exposed and and unsupported. Got some feedback that was not fair, that was not right. But I'm gonna tell you, it was the folks that I worked with before this other team that said, "Nah, that cannot be. Y'all, if y'all don't want her, we gladly will take her back. We will not let her leave this company." And so we all end up in these situations from time to time where work gets sticky, uncomfortable. We might have a bad year, a bad quarter,
Yep.
but it's those allyships that make the difference. Those allies that make the difference in our organizations. And so I don't want y'all to be like some of our guests and listeners today who've had to leave their employer because they didn't have anyone in their corner. So, Latesha, tell our audience how they can save a superstar, a high potential, a high performer, and then also let them know any last remarks that you have before we end today's conversation.
Yeah, it's so much I want to respond to because Janine, you've always been hard on me, but you've always pushed me, and I've always taken that feedback and wanted to do better. Wanted to improve, and just having someone who can be honest with you, like you said, not just gaslight you. It is really important. When I made the decision to leave corporate America, I left corporate America much sooner than I had planned. I felt like I had a few more years in me, but I was going through a situation where I was also navigating being othered, being excluded, dealing with, to be honest, like a workplace bully. Someone who made my environment just a living hell. And I was just trying to do my job. I was called out for, having an attitude. And as you all can see, that's just not who I am. That's not my demeanor by any means. But there are people who are going to be threatened by you just because of who you are and what you look like. But I did have allies in that company that really were there for me. I'll give one big example here. I remember going to someone who I had considered to be an ally, and I said, "Hey, look, this is my experience." And they said, "Are you sure?" They've never done that to me. They've never treated me that way. Right.
Gaslight, gaslight, gaslight.
Mm-hmm. And I said, "Oh, this person is not an ally. This person is not in my corner. An ally is not someone who's going to dismiss your experience." And something I always say in my allyship trainings is, you may not relate to someone's experience. That doesn't mean that you can't see it for what it is. That doesn't mean that you can't validate their experience. So then I had other folks on the other end, when I would tell them what I was going through, they would say, "Wow, I'm so sorry you're going through that. how can I support you, right? They did not, say, well, I don't believe you, or are you sure that really truly happened? And it wasn't even like that, right? And so I'm saying all that to say that, I know there's so many stories of women, Black women, or people from historically excluded groups that are leaving corporate not because they want to, but because they have to, for their own mental health, for their own sanity. Saying all that to say, if you are wanting to be an ally, please just check on people. Like, check on people, check in with people, and also check yourself as well. If you have these biases towards folks, like, really truly make an effort to get to know people beyond the mask, beyond the work. And you will start to see people really open up to you. And I just hope that you all will challenge yourselves to, unpack the level of safety that you are creating or contributing to on your team, in your organization, and ask yourself, like, how can I make this a better space? How can I make this a better team environment so we all can thrive? Because if everyone else on your team performs better, that's going to make your job a lot easier at the same time.
So good. All right. We're ending another show with a mic drop, some great nuggets. Latesha Byrd, tell everybody how they can get in touch with you, how they can work with you. So y'all can, get to know her like I do and see how fabulous she is.
Thanks, Janine. I have to come back because I feel like we just barely scratched the surface, like there's so much we could talk about. But yeah, you all can find me, Latesha Byrd, BYRD, on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram, Twitter pretty heavily, Latesha_Byrd. And yeah, send me a request to connect on LinkedIn. Shoot me a message. I would love to hear from you all. If you have any questions or anything that came up for you in today's conversation, I would love to hear it. So please don't be a stranger.
All right. Y'all connect with Latesha. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Untoxic Boss podcast as we talk today about allyship strategies for a racially divided workplace. Just remember, at the Untoxic Boss, we are here to help you not be a jerk at work. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Follow us on social media for more updates and insights. Together, we can build a workplace where everyone has the opportunity to thrive. We want to introduce you a resource that we know that will impact your life and your career. It's a book, Unstuck and Unstoppable. It is the ultimate guide to overcoming obstacles and achieving your goals. With practical tips and inspiring stories, the book will help you leverage your value, increase your visibility, and gain recognition to accelerate your career. Get your copy either on Amazon or at our website at unstuckandunstoppablebook.com.